ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our live discussion with Jeff and Nora about warm data today. So as I knew Nora, you don't know Jeff. Jeff, do you know Nora?
I've heard lots about Nora, of course. I've seen some podcasts, and I'm associated with a few people who I believe run in your circles. Phoebe Tickle, I speak with often, and yeah, I've come across warm data a number of times, and yeah, definitely really excited about what the Bateson Institute is doing, and yeah, really happy to be here today to chat.
Great. As I talked to Nora, she hasn't heard about you, but this is gonna change now. So this live discussion will be about warm data, and we will see where this will go to. So Nora Bateson, I think a lot of people know her already. She found, or she used this word. I heard it's 2018 in her little YouTube clip where she explained what that could be. And I also heard that you're working on warm data since 2012, so it's already been 8 years. And I guess that there have been a lot of things happening with the new thing called warm data that didn't exist before. And Jeff, you are working on you are more from the tech side. You are working on the CAT. What is a systems simulation, where you yourself say you use warm data and, well, you take big data and put it back in the systems to create warm data. Is that right?
Right. So it's kind of a complexity respecting data science tool, so that you can use big data in a way that's contextually appropriate to the use case and the user. And you can simulate and model complex adaptive systems to understand where they may fail or where they may need, appropriate incentive design to protect against systemic failures. So really interesting times.
So Nora, would you approve that this is warm data, what the Bateson Institute is also talking about?
Without looking at it and playing with it and, really diving in with Jeff, I'm loving that warm data is finding its way out in the world, and I think that it's it's an ongoing challenge, really, because it's uncomfortable, right? So one of the reasons I think that our world has and when I say our world, what I'm really talking about is the more Western history of science. There's an anxiety around having knowledge that can be in bite-sized bits, to be able to isolate the edges of a piece of information. And I myself am constantly dealing with that paradox of how do you think about information in ways that doesn't decontextualize it? And if you do decontextualize it, how do you put it back in context? And essentially, what does it mean? I mean, this is the whole warm data question here. What does it mean to have information that is alive? Right? Because how are we going to be able to respond better to the complexity we live within if basically the information that we're using isn't as alive as the world we're in? So, it's like when you're on Zoom and you have a bad Wi-Fi connection and there's a lag, and I go, and 5 seconds later you hear, right? It's that thing of being out of sync, out of kilter, out of the same even tonality or range, a spectrum of patterning, of rhythming, the impulse to control sets us at odds with the very thing that keeps warm data warm.
Thank you for the overview and also description what warm data actually is. So to put it together, warm data is what you said. It's like information that is we call it maybe also big data in our times, that was put out of the context and not put to get back in the context again. And then there are decisions made that are, yeah, sometimes I don't like to say the term wrong, but not very sustainable, maybe saying it like that. And the warm data is the interdependence between elements, between people, between human and nature and everything, what happens in between. Is that right?
It'll do. That'll work. I mean, I think what I'd like to do is push you a little further into the blur. Okay, so imagine, like, okay, so my mom is 91, right? When she was a little kid, the doctor used to come to her house. It was a different world. When she got sick, the doctor came to her house. When the doctor walked in the door of her house, the doctor was already taking in all kinds of information. What was the stoop of her doorstep look like? Who answered the door? Are the carpets clean? Is there light in the house? Is there vitality? Is there anything cooking? Is this a house that's suffering from poverty or anger or violence? Or, there's all these subtle messages that are not spoken. So that then when my little mom, who was probably 5 or 6 at the time, showed the doctor, just as an imagination, showed him a rash on her arm or something, the doctor saw that rash, but the doctor perceived that rash in addition to a lot of other information. And so when the doctor responded to her, he, even in the tone of his voice, was the calibration and the responsiveness to a lot of other information that he was taking in. What did it say on the clipboard? Maybe the Latin name for that particular rash and the particular salve he gave to her for it. But what happened in the treatment? What happened in the conversation with her parents? How did that, fit in with other information in the community? History across generations of responsiveness to skin irritations, all sorts of things are going on in that one moment. And that particular doctor, that particular moment on that particular day in that particular family is able to see and perceive particular nuances of the complex contextual information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Totally. I'm an actor, Nora. So for me, this is actually all my working as an actor is all warm data. It's like when you're in the scene, you see the other person, you see another person, you feel the air, you smell what is in there, and then there's just action reaction, and it always changes. There is no like this happens, then this, then this, then this. Everything is just dependent on everything, and that's the magical thing. So yeah, I totally understand.
You get it.
Understand. And there is magic. Then this magic happens, when like two people just being in that one moment and really sensing what the other is sensing. Then this is like great acting. I get goosebumps when I'm talking about that.
Yeah.
Jeff, so when you hear that, just for you also, Nora, Jeff has the system simulation CAD, and you already tried it in Kenya, is it right? With the Red Cross.
Yeah, right. So a project that I'm working with is called the Common Stack, and we're building tools to scale collective intelligence and collaboration at a higher level. And I think big data, when we look at how data is used in the world today, it's so far separated from the user. And this is really what got me down the trail of warm data is, we have these corporations that are taking or we're giving them our data because they offer us a product we like, and then they run away with that data and they generate all kinds of value for themselves. And don't share that back with the user, or they manipulate it in ways that, or it is manipulated by third parties, because this is kind of the advertising revenue model they have, and it doesn't really benefit the people, and it doesn't really build the kind of digital societies or physical societies that we really are looking for. So the tools that we're using, including CAD, which is a new data science tool. It's called Complex Adaptive Dynamics Computer-Aided Design. And it can basically put the context back in the data. And what we're using it for in Kenya right now with the Community Inclusion Currency Project with the Red Cross is to launch local currencies in these rural villages, and then using those local currencies to promote the mutual support of these communities for each other. So we're seeing really, really impressive early results. I mean, early results, this has been going on for 10 years under Will Ruddick. Actually, we've only gotten involved in the past year, and we've been working to model their system so that we can understand at a higher level, what kind of incentives in the system work to benefit the users of that system. We can put in recycling incentives, we can put in community incentives, because currency design is ultimately a really, really powerful tool, maybe one of the largest coordination tools for humanity at scale. And we're really experimenting with the features of that money and how we can encourage people to do the right things. And of course, that's a rabbit hole and a really deep question that can be unpacked at multiple levels. What is the right thing? Who says what the right thing is? And what we're trying to do is put the tools in the hands of the people who are using them so that they can decide, and so that they can use these computer design tools like we do in air traffic navigation. We have incredibly complex systems that we have computer aided tools to allow us to navigate that complexity, but we haven't used those tools for our own collective decision making. How do we address climate change? How do we address poverty at a global level, or homelessness? These are all kind of policy choices that can be assisted by what we're calling computer aided governance. And that's what we're really excited about, is being able to feed in a whole bunch of data and then keep it contextualized to the community that's using it, but also deriving important decision support from that towards solving really big problems.
So I'm very curious. So when I take Nora's grandma, for example, and I put it in this system in Kenya, and she wants to buy a house, for example, and then there's the banker coming, and he's watching her, touching her, sensing her, and then he's going back to you, Jeff, and you write a code about how this worked, or how can I bring this two warm data together?
For sure. So I would say the in-person context that Nora was just speaking about with the doctor and her grandmother is a really special kind of human-to-human connection. But we need to solve some of our biggest problems, we need to scale this kind of human connection. And I don't mean scale in like a Silicon Valley, like one way to scale, and scale one product to the world, but scaling the trust between humans, and the context, the understanding between humans, because ultimately this is how we're going to solve our big problems like climate change, like biodiversity loss on a global scale. We need to scale that trust. And that's actually how I got into the blockchain space, was reading about this new technology where we can keep data immutable, so we can keep it untampered with. And when we do that, we have whole new opportunities with data. We can give data back to the people. I can hold my data, you can hold your data, Nora's grandma can hold her data, and we can start to interact with people over the internet on the other side of the world, or even in our own local communities, having these reputation tokens or expertise tokens, or However, the context of the situation demands it. We can now scale that person-to-person context, that trust between a doctor and the data that he's encountering in person, to a wider scale, to to a community, to a bioregion, to a nation, or to the globe. So that, in my mind, is how we get from a world of cold data, extractive data, where corporations are extracting value and advertisers are coming in and even manipulating foreign elections, and being able to bring that back to the people and to the context in which that it benefits them.
Thank you also for bringing in the cold data also, because we had the question from Jeff Miller, or his piece of advice for the others to see the difference between cold, hot, and warm data. So the warm data is the thing what happens in between elements, people. The cold data, it's like your grandma is 91. Sorry, we're getting always back to your grandma, Nora. I hope that's okay, but that's a very
it's my mother, not my grandmother, but yeah.
Oh, it's your mother. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Coming always back to your mother. So she's something old. She's that height. She's something that. Mm-hmm. So this is cold data, right? What would be the hot data?
The thing is that we're in confusing territory here, because there's another whole world of data description that actually uses the terminology of hot, warm, and cold. So I think for our work, what we're really talking about is warm data in terms of transcontextual information, relational process information that is pertaining specifically to complex living systems. And cold data, I would describe as that stuff that doesn't have relationships in it, that is decontextualized. So the second you start measuring something, you've taken it out of context. If you try to add contexts and start to see, okay, well, what does this measurement mean? It means nothing when you start to add multiple contextual frames. But where we get into issues with that is that there's a common kind of illusion out there that if you just add more data, more streams, more perspectives, you're going to get context. But that's not how you get context. So the common procedure is to, for example, make a systems map and then start listing stakeholders and stream in lots of big data on those stakeholders. But if you do that, you don't make context. You make craziness, because what happens is that the warm data is not, the context is not having a bigger spreadsheet. It's the relationship between those different possibilities, those different entities, those different organisms, those different people, those different contextual processes. Okay, so like, think about your own body or a village or a family or a forest, any complex living system. And you can have all the data you want on each member of the family. It tells you nothing about what their relationships are. You can have all the data you want on all the different organisms in a forest. It tells you nothing about that particular forest and the relational processes that are happening there that are different from other forests, right? A town, the same thing. So it's really, it's a shift that allows for, and the big shift happens with this idea of transcontextual, right? It's what happens when you're looking at more than one context at the same time. And so, for example, in my body, in the Nora-ness, okay, you could have the context of me as oh my God, a middle-aged white woman. How the hell did that happen? I don't know, but it happened. Okay, so you could have that context. You could have the context of me as a daughter. right? Of my 91-year-old mom who had home visits from her doctor in the Carolinas, you know, a long time ago, or of a daughter of my father who, you know, thought about systems thinking early on. You could think about the context of me as 400 trillion organisms that live in and on me, or my culture, my language, the particular, you know, house and geography that I live in, my economic actions and incomes and goings and those sorts of thinkings. Why am I thinking in those ways, desiring in those ways? So every one of those contexts has totally different patternings of communication and interaction going on in them, completely. And if you separate them out, you can really see how different they are. But they're not separated out, because here I am. I'm not like a, you know, a stratified version of me, you know, coming together in various, you know, let's put this frame forward or this frame forward. I'm just being me. I'm just here. And there is absolutely no way you can pull the me that is a mom apart from the 400 trillion organisms that I am, or the geography that I'm sitting in, or how much sleep I had last night, or how I'm feeling about, you know, the emergence of conspiracy theory a million miles from me in the United States. Like, all of these things are here with me in every word and intonation that we are having here. So it's like, one of the things that I always say is it's like wine, you know, you can't take the grapes out of the wine. And it would be really nice. And you know, you can definitely say there's grapes in the wine. You can definitely say that, but you cannot pull them out and study them anymore. There's no way to do that. So I think for me, one thing that really helps with warm data is to think about systemic process. This is going to sound wacko to you, but it's really useful, I promise. If you think about systemic process in liquid form, stop imagining in metaphors of solids, because then you don't get the idea that you can ever take things apart, right? How would you get the grapes out of the wine? Or how are you going to get, you know, the various, how would you untangle the ink from the water? And when you look at it that way, you're more likely to be looking for relational, I mean, the word that I use is intersteeping, how things are steeping together, this deep relational, because time, you can't take time out of living things. They're always moving through time. They're always responding and shifting. And so the habit of like taking a snapshot and saying, here's our thing, and now we're going to do something to the thing, is it puts us at that lag, that distance of sense making. I hope that's helpful. And now to kind of like think about how that works, Jeff, with your work. I mean, it's a real challenge because there's all sorts of stuff there. You know, there's like the idea of reputation. I mean, the idea of reputation, I sometimes worry about this idea because of the warm data. Because in my experience, the people who don't contribute are the ones who feel disenfranchised to begin with. And I'm not sure that that incentivization actually changes any of the power, those existing inequalities of relationship. I'm not sure that the texture is going to change if you call it reputation, because the same people will be excluded because they won't feel that, because of the warm data, right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how any of this is going to work. And I don't I would love to help you with it and brainstorm, because I think that there are some interesting possibilities that come with that transcontextual space. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think you're very right. There are a million ways all of this could go wrong, as with everything. And when you're designing systems of reputation or systems of expertise, or this is like really, really dangerous territory, because you could create all sorts of monstrosities. And this is again bringing it back to the modeling and simulation. Is you've heard of Rawls' veil of ignorance, I imagine. That's the There's a philosopher, John Rawls. He said, when we're designing a society, we should design it such that if you were to enter that society as any age, any person in that society, would you want to be a part of this society? So in other words, are we designing our systems to consider like the average person, or every person, or just the top? This isn't a society that I would choose to join at any random point, because there's very few that have very much at the top. There's a small cushion that are comfortable, and then there's globally there's a massive group of people that are forgotten and left behind. And I think what we are verging on now is the opportunity to create choice for those people who are left behind. They can choose alternative systems, whether those be alternative economic systems. Our idea of the future is a bunch of interconnected commons. And each commons it's kind of like belonging to a nation state now. We don't really have a choice. It's just based on where we're born. And sure, we may emigrate and get a different passport, but we don't really have a choice to opt in or out of most of the global systems, the money systems, the tax systems. Those are kind of imposed on us. What I'm really excited for is the opportunity to build alternatives where people can now choose. I choose to belong to this community, this commons, this maybe global healthcare commons, a global carbon commons, or I don't choose those because they don't treat me right. And I'm going to choose these ones because they value my inputs to the system. So I think a lot of the disengagement, as you say, Nora, really good point, the people who don't have reputation probably don't, because they don't want to participate with that system. But if we can create systems that they do want to be a part of, or they can create their own system with these tools that we're building, because this is the idea. We're not building the systems, we're building the tools that people can create their new economic systems, community systems that they want to be a part of and engage in. And then we can have connected, if you think of this in terms of graph theory, so everything is nodes and edges. And Nora, your point, it's really difficult to separate this graph structure, because you are simultaneously, perhaps a mother, a daughter, 400 trillion different organisms, and these are all graphs that are one on top of the other. These are the edge that we share in that graph may be friends or colleagues, or but you will never be my mother or my daughter. So that edge does not exist between our nodes on the graph. But between other nodes, you do have those connections. So it's about the data that's passed along this graph, and it's a really useful mental model. And I'm sure systems thinkers like this is fairly common. But thinking about the world in terms of graphs and the data that's encoded between nodes and edges of that graph, we can get a much more detailed picture of how things interrelate in the world. And of course, when you flatten that into data bits, you lose some of the person-to-person context, but it also allows for scale to be able to cooperate with strangers on the other side of the world around problems that affect us both. For example, like climate change. So I'm really interested in exploring this space, and really definitely happy to connect with you, Nora, and discuss further, because I think that the human connection, the warm data is really important to this whole movement.
I think so, because I think that the things we think we're talking about are never the things we're really talking about. And so it may be possible to draw a graph that says, well, what we're both concerned about is climate, or that we have this in common. but the actual relational contextual processes on the ground are so particular. And for me, this is where so much of the complexity work gets it gets flat, frankly. It loses its warmth and its dimensionality, because it's in that particularity that possibility is born. And the habit is to come in and to say, what we've got to do is we've got to design. I mean, like when you say when we design a society, and immediately I'm thinking, God, don't do that. Whatever you do, don't do that, because it will definitely come from a set of blind spots. And societies aren't there to be designed. That's where we've gone wrong, right? So much needs to happen in that relational process to begin with. And so for me, the question is, what's possible? And that has to do with mutual learning. It has to do with the way we are learning to be in our world. Okay, this is a terminology that I created called symathesy, sim meaning together, mathesy meaning learning. And that mutual learning, when you see that crooked tree in the woods, you could say, how is that tree crooked? Maybe we should let's design a better tree. Same kind of tree, different part of the forest, a very straight tree, tall and healthy. And you think, now that's how that tree's supposed to look. This is a thriving tree. Let's make this unthriving tree more like this thriving tree. Okay? First of all, you got to question, what is your position in doing there? What is this notion of agency to begin with? Where do we get off thinking we should tinker with stuff? Secondly, there is this other question of what kind of a question is that, right? So like you see that crooked tree, and the first question that I would want to ask is, how is that crooked tree learning to be in its world? What are all the relationships and interdependencies with where the water runs under the earth, how the soil is, what the bacteria is, where the shadows fall, where the wind blows, where the animals are, where the humans walk, where the dogs pee, where the leaves pile, where the birds live. And that those relational processes form and inform that crookedness. So that tree is treeing, it's contextualizing and transcontextualizing into its world. It's learning to be in its world. And that learning process is a mutual process, right? Those earthworms are learning to be in relationship to that tree, as are the other trees and the birds and the soil and the bacteria. And right, it's all particular, and yet there are larger other patterns in play. But each tree is different. So how do we contribute to that? How do we, reframe the questions that are asked to begin with, so that we don't end up with prescriptions? Okay, so that's the big piece for me. And I had this kind of chilling moment not too long ago of doing some work. I was playing with the lifeboat metaphor. And I did my friend Tom Cummings said, you got to look at this up and, check out Garrett Harding, and sort of the early work on the threat to the commons and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I found out about that is that, in fact, he was a eugenicist and a white nationalist. And this is really important, because this instinct to gain control of natural resources and populations, and to actually measure and manipulate, is really dark. It comes from a dark history, and that warm data needs to be out in the public. That warm data is needed. It's not just nothing. So what questions get asked that provide these measurements really matters. And how they get, it's like, I think for me, the whole question of warm data is not in opposition to cold data, it's in relationship to. So if we pull something out of context and we define it and we measure it and we, ossify it and concretize it and take it out of time and place and all those things, fine, but put it back. And then see what happens so that you have both. And so for me, that's really important. I'm talking too much, sorry.
No, not at all. That was really great. And I think there's some more threads to explore there, because Garrett Hardin was the one who wrote about the tragedy of the commons, basically saying that when a resource is given to the commoners, they run roughshod over it. And actually, this was studied in detail by Elinor Ostrom and a number of other fantastic thinkers who basically overturned that theory, because what Hardin was studying was not the commons. He was actually studying like a market free-for-all, where there were no rules, there were no context, there was no relationships between the members. So for example, a fishery, everyone, if they only take one fish a day, it will stay sustainable. But if you take a second fish, you will have more profit than the other fishermen. So everyone is incentivized to take a second fish, leads to resource collapse, etc. Right. What Elinor Ostrom studied is actually these patterns of commoning. So she went around the world and she studied communities who were successfully managing these shared resources and came up with a list of 8 principles. And I mean, you can probably break those out into even more. And this is really what we're basing, the work at the Common Stack off of is we're not designing systems, we're designing tools for systems that follow these patterns. So it's all about creating the proper context for communities to create systems that work for themselves. And I completely agree with you, Nora, when we come into system design, we can't think about it from a top-down mechanistic point of view. We have to understand how the system works and how the system evolves and what made that tree crooked. Perhaps that serves that tree. And in natural systems, we have so much to learn. We have so much to learn from nature. But there's also human systems that are already that have been implanted. And those systems are not serving the needs of the collective. For example, our monetary system primarily. Money is not a natural object. Pretty much anything on the planet you can have too much of. You can have too much butter, you can have too many mangoes, like at some point there's a tipping point where, you basically need to get rid of these things for free because they're going to go bad in your house. But money isn't like that. Money is unnatural. And it puts us in a scarcity mindset because no matter how much money you have, you can always have more. And this puts us, whenever you spend money, that's, an opportunity cost because you could spend that money on something else. And we have this weird relationship with money. And that's at the core of some of these systems that we're trying to build, is just rethinking this, the scarcity mindset that fiat money, that government money puts us in. And of course, all of the extraction and colonialism and, all of the Western world, colonizing the global South, and how that is all encoded in our money systems. And we aren't so much trying to come into nature and say, this needs to be like this, but we're looking at the systems we're using and then comparing them with natural systems and saying, hey, wait a second, why maybe some of our problems are created because our economic systems and our decision-making systems aren't mimicking what we see in nature. Maybe we should have more value flows rather than, profit maximizing individuals and corporations. And that's kind of the story that goes along with it, the rat race. You have to put in your time and be productive, and then you amass this wealth and then you've made it. Meanwhile, everyone is lonely and separated, and it's just not serving the needs of the people using it for the most part, unless you're at the very, very small, tip of the pyramid, in which case you're basically extracting, what the wealth of the future generations and so on. So I completely agree with you. We have to be very careful when we come at system design. And we have to look at the systems that are already in play and watch them, watch the flows. I really like what you said about think of it in terms of liquid. And we think of governance flowing. And this is one of the tools we're building is called conviction voting. So it's basically like vote streaming. So in a forest, how information passes from tree to tree through mycelial networks, actually. Some really fantastic research going on the west coast of Canada, where I am right now, where they study that carbon travels from tree to tree, especially mother trees to child trees. So they find these information flows in a forest, but they don't vote once every 4 years, like we do. This is a strange kind of like system that has built up with our technology, that we say, okay, you're in charge, and we're all going to say yes or no, and we're going to do that once every time period. This is just a strange way of signaling. It's very slow. It's like 4-bit. My Nintendo was moving that fast in the 80s, but we've come 40 years since then, and our governance systems actually haven't upgraded themselves in hundreds of years. So one of the things we're experimenting with is vote streaming, you could call it. So I can continuously broadcast my preference, and that preference might be, I want the potholes on my street fixed, or, I really want a homeless shelter in this city, or I think my tax rate should be lower, or I think everyone should get a UBI. You can just continuously stream your preferences and have that as a signal, an aggregated signal, so we can have a whole society looking at, what do we value? What do we want to do with our collective resources? Sorry, you looked like you had something to add there, Nora.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I'm working on this project right now that's bringing together. It's called the 10,000 Communities or 10,000 Circles project, and one of the things is that we've noticed that there's an issue. Okay, so you go into a community, and that community is struggling with all sorts of stuff. And it's like, if you were to go into a restaurant and someone said, well, what do you want to eat? What would you ask? What would you ask?
What would you like to order?
Yeah, like if I were the wait person and I came to you and said, what would you like to eat? You would say,
what's good?
The menu, right? What can I order, right? And so this is the issue that we're running into here, is that if the communities themselves have, well, they do have, because like you said, we're in existing patterns of existing systems that have existing histories that we're all steeped in, like so many tea bags in a giant teapot, right? So we're long steeped in this history. And when it comes to that question of what would you like your community to be? Part of the response comes to, well, what can we ask for? Right? And so the issue becomes, okay, if people start to ask for, ways to make more money, then what they're asking for is how to get deeper into the existing system. Right? How can we be more affluent? How can we get more opportunities for our kids? We want this, we want that, we want this. And then you have to get the appropriate grant from all these different siloed positionings to supply that thing. Because on the ground, there is not a set of relational communicational processes about the interdependency that is being shared. Are you with me? So it's a trick question of what do you want? Because the what do you want is based on a set of pre-assumptions that are already in the warm data. They're already in the culture. And how to get out of that, and this is what this 10,000 Communities project is all about. So it'd be really interesting to collaborate on this, but is using the warm data lab process to essentially bring lots of communities into a heightened state of familiarity with what it is to live in a complex system, but not in so many words. Okay, it's not about teaching systems theory. It's that the Warm Data Lab offers a process that allows people to become familiar with fairly high level systems theory without ever using the word. So because it's there, because we're living creatures and we've got it. And, one of the things that I've actually discovered is that that those communities who are the most betrayed in the most severe um, vulnerability have the quickest aptitude for actually the most sort of substantial lift in their complexity and systems thinking, because they know exactly what it feels like to be systemically betrayed. Exactly. So, for people who've lived a more linear life, where if you just did the right thing and you were a good person and you did well in school and you got a job and you carried on and things worked and it was pretty linear. But if you have lived a life where all of those pathways that were in the narrative were shut off to you, you learn pretty quickly what systemics are. So those communities in particular and globally have a fairly quick aptitude for what it is to have to be contributing to relational process. Okay. And so then when that want that they want isn't a new school, it isn't a new clinic, it isn't any of the things, it's what they want pretty quickly is, but they want it. It's not being brought as a menu item, is to have opportunities to build relational process that then builds the next thing. So it's this thing of building relationships that build relationships that build relationships, like the soil does. That's what the soil does.
Yeah, it's a process of sense making before the process of action. And completely agreed.
Yeah. Otherwise, you just end up back in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And we haven't given you a chance to say anything in so long, Daniel. It's definitely your turn. Sorry.
I'm just a host. I'm listening. I'm super wow. And I'm reading all the questions. So maybe well, something popped into my mind, of course. Because I really the things you're talking about, I really also have this picture of of a scene. Let's say Hamlet. Acting is like 90% of your time invested is data analysis. This is acting. It's data analysis. You look in what's the scene, what happened before, what is going to happen afterwards. You see what the character has done, how the psychological constitution is, how your psychological constitution is, what the director's vision is, what the dramaturg's vision is, what the writer's vision is. So you have all these datas, and then there is this 3 minutes of this monologue, be or not to be, maybe 5 minutes, and you worked about, I don't know, 5 days just for this 5 minutes. And this is action. This is the actor. So this is when something happens. And in this process of acting, it is all about letting go. So 90% data analysis, and the rest is just letting go. And everything just comes naturally, and you kind of embody everything, all the processes, or the data, or the information, you embody it. But this needs a really, really high skill. And I think, Nora, what you're saying, I'm wow, yeah, it's really goosebumps again. It's really about this high skill systems thinking. People need to have this ability to reflect and know how everything works together, so they can understand the information that is happening around, to understand it, and to process it in a sustainable way, in a human way, the letting go, let's say, to have it all and then say, now it's gone. So this just popped into my mind.
It's
right.
I love that, Daniel, because it ties into, there's like a certain amount of those of us who've been in this kind of systems complexity scene for a while, we've been tossing around these words of ambiguity and uncertainty for some decades. And one of the things that becomes more and more clear to me ties into what you said and into the process of improvisation, which is about spontaneity. And the thing about spontaneity is it's about being in that uncertainty, but this uncertainty is not a static state. Uncertainty is happening in time. And actions are taking place. You can't, I mean, even to not do something is an action, right? So the pause you take is an action. The words you don't speak are an action. So that notion of that spontaneity, I think, is the big piece. And for me, this also becomes a very important piece of the question of, what the hell is happening in the world right now with all the fake news and the propaganda and the ways in which people are feeling so manipulated, lied to. Jeff, you mentioned trust, and I have to just think, well, I don't even know what that is anymore. And that on some level, the way in which one generates propaganda or manipulates is actually by removing context and telling people what to think. Okay, that's critical to the process of actually having manipulative leverage. And with warm data, we're doing exactly the opposite of putting more context in and not telling people what to think. Let them make their own connections. And then those connections are so particular. They're so intimate. They're so, at the zoom in detail, granular, atomized. Jeff's associations are his, Daniel, yours are yours, mine are mine. And I could say the word plum jam and all three of us have a different thing there, right? And that matters. So how to, essentially utilize this opening into, I call it warm data, but whatever you want to call it, into this world of multi-contextual process, to provide a kind of anti-venom to the sense of manipulation and propaganda that is actually spinning completely out of control right now. What is true, what's not true, who's pulling the strings, who's in control, who's designing the society, right? and this is I'm poking at you, Jeff, but at some level that there is that, right? There is that someone's poking at us, because you know what? People have been poking. People have been manipulating. And I don't know, where the edges of that whole game are, but I do know that it's time for something new. And that new thing needs to be so clean. The integrity has to be so true. It has to be, to come into the world now with anything to offer is to offer it from a place of not thinking that you know what's best for other people. And recognizing that we have enormous blind spots, all of us, that our language alone is blinding us. So there's a lot of humility, integrity, and I think a lot of generosity that needs to kind of come through. Whatever this new thing we're calling information is, what does it, like that tree in the forest, what form does this information form? What comes out in form? And if we're talking transformation, what forms are crossing through that information?
Absolutely. And I think that the way forward is about empowerment. It's about empowering collective sense making and empowering collective action without prescribing it, without saying, your society or your group or your currency will work like this, but rather going bottom up and saying, here are convivial tools that we can all use. Here are ways that we can collectively sense make and collectively take action towards what's important to us without saying, this is important to you. I think that's really important in the design of these tools, is that we're not coming at it from a top-down mechanistic way, but we're seeding the ground for a fertile bottom-up growth. We are creating the opportunity for communities to grow in the way that they choose to grow, and improving those feedback loops, like those feedback loops exist in nature. Because I think our current a lot of our problems that we see in the world today are because we have kind of come at it from a reductionist, mechanistic way of thinking, and we have these profit maximizing. Capitalism is like the paperclip AI that's going to reduce the whole world to paperclips. It's going to turn all of our precious resources into pieces of paper, or even worse, like digital, numbers on a screen. Okay, I've got so many numbers on a screen in my bank account. Am I happy now? My oceans are polluted. My trees are cut down. And I really think we need to give the option to people, to the future generations, to choose. Do they want this system that maximizes profit and chews up our precious resources and sets people against people because we're all in a scarcity and greed mindset? Or do we want to consider a potential future of abundance? What does abundance mean to you? What does abundance mean to your community? Maybe it's not, like you said, Nora, with the 10,000 communities, we all need more money for another clinic, another school, another XYZ. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe they just want to sit with each other and not participate in this system of extraction, and that's an option too. And here are some tools that may facilitate you in doing that if you so choose. But I think that's a really important. We're giving the power back to the people. We're bringing it down from these hierarchical systems and saying from the bottom up, what do you choose to build with your future, and what do you choose to prioritize, and how do we even come to those kind of collective decision making? So really, really interesting topics, and really stoked to have this conversation, and excited for more.
Likewise.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Jeff. Time is almost over. And as I'm German, I always try to, time box things I host. We have some questions. Nora, I would ask you the questions, and you have about 45 seconds for each question. I know that's
Okay.
not maybe your nature, but maybe you can try to, summarize it.
Okay.
We start with Stefan. There he asked, Nora, about design. Agree it is dangerous, but designing contexts for things to emerge in would be good, right? 45 seconds.
Okay, 45 seconds. I think it's about being careful about what you are hoping the outcome will be. Okay, it's a matter of what level you're working at. So what I am doing, for example, with Warm Data Labs is I'm not interested in what people come out thinking. Okay, that's not what is important to me. What's important to me is to provide the conditions for multiple contexts to cross each other, and for them to be able to show up in their multiple versions of self, and to let that overlap and intersteep into new ways of perceiving. But I don't get to say what those are. Okay, those are not my associations. That's not my place to tinker. So I make a space, I create a space of conditions and meta messages. Okay, the meta messages are important. And then I let whatever happens happen. So that's to me, that's where design is interesting, is in the conditions that allow, if you think of thoughts and ideas and ways of making sense of our world as consequences of different forms of sense making coming into interaction with each other, then what I'm doing is creating the conditions in which the consequences would be different.
Thank you.
Is that 45 seconds?
No, it was more, but it doesn't matter. I think it was 90 seconds, but it's okay. Thank you very much. I hope Stefan is happy with the answer. So Ryan asked also, Nora, how should we think of the role of government as it relates to complexity, warm data, symaphacity? He's adding to his question, most complexity theorists I know default to libertarianism as they are against top-down government tinkering.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and oh gosh, I'm gonna have to give you a little reveal here, which is that I guess, I'm sorry, but I guess what I'm really seeing is that we are in a state of several levels of system melt at this point. So where governance is now and what the thoughts are around governance, I think are probably in pretty serious transformation. So I would say for now, the best possible thing is for people to need people. People Need People is the name of our big community project, and so that's what I'm going for right now. Is just, I don't know. I tweeted about this just yesterday. I think my 90-year-old mother said, "It sure does feel good when people help each other." So somehow there's a lot of epistemological change right there. And I don't know that policy can change that. I think that has to happen first with just people. Additionally, I think there are larger systems that they're going to be pretty upside down for some time. So what happens with governance? I don't know. I so wish that we could be working with this at other levels. I am doing warm data with the Finnish government, and that's really exciting. So I guess it depends on the size of the project and the pilot program.
Right, thank you. So we have more questions, but I will finish with that one, I guess, because time is over already. I think Joss is Systems Innovations is asking a question for Nora and Jeff. Aren't warm data and tokens ways for accounting for the whole of a system rather than just the parts? Did you understand it?
Say it again.
A question for Nora and Jeff. Aren't warm data and tokens ways for accounting for the whole of a system rather than just the parts?
Go ahead, Jeff. You have 45 seconds.
On the clock. Yeah, no, I think this is the where blockchain kind of enters the scene. Is tokens are these tokens of account, that we can now use to understand different levels of the system. So you can see, and this is what makes interpersonal connections so great, because as Nora pointed out at the beginning of this call, the doctor that walks into the house can take in all sorts of context that wouldn't be available to him if it was just, here is the problem, I broke my finger or whatever. You're only presenting one part of the situation. And tokens, are, say, I'm heavily involved in my community. But you guys may not know that. But if I had a token saying, hey, I've participated in homeless shelters and food drives and this, and I have a wallet of tokens that say I've engaged in my community in all of these positive ways, and then I bring that to this situation, you guys can look and say, wow, that gentleman is really active in this community. So it kind of brings some of the context of what I've been involved previously to now, that can feed additional information to the current situation. And maybe that's, our future is you are a member, a citizen of a community if you participate to a certain degree. If I offset my CO2, my carbon footprint, for example, maybe I'm eligible for 20% discount on my healthcare, or we get all these interesting network leverage effects that if we participate, if we engage with our communities, or the things that we find valuable, we can recognize and value each other for that. So I think it's definitely a way that we can bring in a bigger picture of ourselves into, relation with each other, even digitally, even through screens, as seems to be happening more and more, especially with COVID and so on. So I think that, yeah, very good point, Joss, that we're, being able to represent larger context of the system with these kinds of new tools.
Laura, you want to add something? 45 seconds? No, it's okay.
I think our time is up, and I think Jeff spoke
Right.
to that really beautifully. We're up against our history and old epistemological frames that want to break everything into parts, and have those parts be exchangeable, fixable. But relationships don't fix in the same way. What we're talking about is a kind of healing of a way of seeing the world, of making sense of the world. And hopefully that healing will be warm.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you very much for this very lively discussion, for all these inspirations and interesting inputs, and also combining the two worlds. You're living, but you're not living. You're living in one world, but it's the two ways of thinking about warm data and perspective, bringing it also to the community. And I would love to have you in maybe 1 year, as if you really, when you start working together, maybe we can have another live discussion in 1 year and see where this work